This rod right here cost me $28 at Walmart, and it has outfished rods worth 10 times that price. I know that sounds like something a guy says on the internet to get clicks, but I have proof sitting right here. See this $300 stick right next to it? Tournament grade, fancy cork, name brand guides, the whole glossy package deal right here. Last month I handed both of these rods to a buddy and told him to cast blindfolded with each one and tell me which was which. He picked the Walmart rod as the expensive one every single time, and he got genuinely irritated when I showed him the receipt. The difference between these two rods is 5 modifications that take about 5 minutes total and cost less than a cup of gas station coffee. And the reason your local tackle shop will never walk you through what I am about to show you is painfully simple to understand. It would cost them about $300 per customer if every angler figured this out on their own workbench tonight. Here is what you are walking away with before this video ends. 5 specific hands-on changes you can make right now today. Each one takes under 60 seconds. Each one uses materials you probably already have in your garage or kitchen drawer somewhere. When you are done, that budget rod is going to feel alive in your hands, sensitive enough to feel a crawdad twitch on the bottom. You will cast farther, detect more bites, set hooks harder, and fish longer without your wrist turning into a cramped-up disaster by noon. I have done this to over 300 rods in the last 5 years for guide clients, tournament guys, and weekend warriors who just want more. Every single modification I am showing you today comes from 15 years of building custom rods in my tackle laboratory back home. These are the same principles I use when I build sticks for guys who compete at the national level and pay me serious money. The only difference is, I am handing you the shortcut version that works on any cheap rod you can pull off a clearance rack. Let me tell you how I know this works, because credentials matter when somebody tells you to take sandpaper to your fishing rod. I have spent 25 years guiding on water, not filming content, not selling courses, but actually putting people on fish for a living. 15 of those years I have been building rods from raw blanks, wrapping guides, shaping grips, and tuning actions in my shop. I build custom crankbaits that national tournament champions use on stage, and most of them will never publicly admit where those baits came from. 2 years ago, I pulled into a club tournament 30 minutes late because my truck broke down on the way to the ramp. I'd forgotten my rod tube at home, so I walked into the Walmart next to the marina and grabbed a $28 combo. I sat in the parking lot with a hairdryer, some tape, a piece of sandpaper, and a couple of wheel weights from my toolbox. I made 5 changes in about 5 minutes, launched late, and weighed in enough to beat 14 boats, including 3 guys running $400 setups. 2 of those anglers came up to me at the weigh-in and asked what rod I was throwing, dead serious and slightly annoyed about it. When I flipped it over and showed them the Walmart price stickers still stuck to the butt cap, one of them laughed out loud. The other one just stared at me like I had insulted his mother, which honestly made my entire weekend right there on the spot. That rod is still hanging on my shop wall today. It has landed over 200 fish since that parking lot morning, and it shows no signs of quitting. I am not telling you that story to brag, because frankly, a club tournament at a local reservoir is not exactly the Bassmaster Classic on national television. I am telling you because that $28 rod, with 5 minutes of work, performed at a level that made experienced anglers question their own expensive gear. And that is the whole point of what we are doing here, proving that performance is not locked behind a price tag in a glass case. It is locked behind knowledge, and I am about to hand you the key to that case right now. So let us start with the first modification, and this one is the invisible problem that nobody ever checks on a budget rod they buy. Mod number 1 is guide realignment, and it is the silent killer of everything you are trying to feel through your blank and your line. On a mass-produced rod, the guides get epoxied onto the blank by machines that do not care if they are perfectly straight or slightly rotated. A misalignment of 2 or 3 degrees sounds like nothing. You cannot see it with your naked eye just looking at the rod casually. But that tiny rotation creates friction against your line on every single cast and every single retrieve you make all day long. Worse than that, it dampens the vibration traveling from your lure through the line up, through the blank, and into your hand. A client brought me a cheap rod a few years back and said he could not feel anything. No bottom contact, no bites, absolutely nothing at all. I picked it up, sighted down the spine like you would sight down a rifle barrel, and 3 guides were visibly off-center. Here is exactly how you fix it, and it takes about 60 seconds if you go slow and pay attention to what you are doing. Grab a fine point marker, a Sharpie works perfectly, and put a small reference dot on each guide foot where it sits right now on the blank. Now take a regular household hairdryer, the one sitting in your bathroom right now, and heat each guide wrap for about 20 seconds on high. The epoxy softens just enough to let you gently rotate the guide frame into true alignment with the rest of the guide train down the rod. Sight down the rod again from the butt end, just like looking down a barrel, and make sure every guide ring lines up in a perfect straight path. Let the epoxy cool for a minute, recheck your alignment, and you are done with mod number 1. That simple and that fast. I straightened that client's 3 crooked guides in under a minute, handed the rod back, and he made one cast and his eyes went completely wide. He told me it felt like someone turned the volume knob up on the rod. Same line, same reel, same everything, just straight guides. That fix alone will make a real difference on any budget rod you own, but the second modification is the one that honestly changed my business. Mod number 2 is the grip fix, and it gives you a direct physical connection to what your lure is doing 30 feet below the surface. Cheap rods use low-density foam or filler-grade cork stuffed with wood dust and putty that feels fine in your hand but acts like a sponge. Every vibration traveling up that blank, every tick, every bump, every subtle mouth on your bait, gets absorbed and muffled before reaching your fingers. I discovered this completely by accident years ago when a client's grip literally fell apart mid-trip on a hot summer day out on the water. I stripped the remaining material off, wrapped the bare blank with electrical tape as a quick, ugly fix, and handed it back to him immediately. He made one cast and said the rod felt alive for the first time. He could feel every single rock and weed stem on the bottom clearly. That moment sent me down a rabbit hole in my tackle lab that changed how I build every grip on every rod I touch. Here is what you do, and you have got 3 options depending on what you have lying around your house or garage right now. Option 1. Grab some cork sealant from the wood finishing aisle at Home Depot. Any brand like Minwax works fine, costs about $3 a can. Brush a thin coat over the grip surface to fill the pores and harden it up so vibration passes through instead of getting swallowed. Option 2. Wrap the grip with thin tennis over grip tape, the same stuff from the sporting goods aisle at Walmart for about $2 a 3-pack. That compression layer firms up the contact surface and transmits vibration noticeably better than the spongy factory material ever could on its own. Option 3 is the pro-level trick. Put a thin layer of superglue directly on the blank under the grip contact point before wrapping. That creates a rigid bridge between the blank and whatever grip material sits on top of it, and the sensitivity jump is immediate. Now you can feel things through that rod you never felt before, but what if the action itself is still wrong for you? That brings us to mod number 3, and I will be honest with you. This one sounds a little bit crazy until you actually do it. What if your rod is too stiff for finesse work or too floppy for a solid hook set, and you do not want to buy another rod? You can actually change the action of a rod with a $5 pack of sandpaper and about 45 seconds of careful, deliberate work on the tip. A guide client of mine kept ripping jigs straight out of fish mouths because his budget rod had a tip like a broomstick. 0 give at all. Between fishing spots, I took that rod behind the boat, made 6 light passes on the last 5 inches of the tip with 400 grit sandpaper. I tested the flex against my palm after every 2 passes, rotating the blank so I removed material evenly all the way around the section. Handed it back, he dropped a jig on a brush pile ledge, and 40 minutes later he landed his personal best largemouth, 5 pounds, 8 ounces on a rod. He still has that rod 2 years later, and he will not let me touch it again because he swears it is absolutely perfect right now. Here is the critical thing. You go slow because you can always remove more material, but you can never put it back on the blank. Use 400 or 600 grit, nothing coarser, and make 3 or 4 light passes, then stop and test the flex immediately every single time. Load the tip gently against a door frame or a ceiling and feel how the bend curve has changed compared to where you started working. You are shifting the action from stiff toward moderate or from moderate toward moderate fast, depending on what technique you need from this particular rod. Fast tips give you sensitivity and hook set power for jigs and soft plastics. Moderate tips give you shock absorption for treble hook baits and crankbaits. Never sand below the first guide, or you compromise the structural integrity of the blank where it matters most under heavy load. 3 mods done, and the rod in your hand already feels like a completely different tool than what you pulled out of the packaging an hour ago. But we are only halfway through, and the next 2 modifications are the ones that the tackle industry genuinely does not want floating around out here. If any of this is landing for you right now, if you have ever felt like you were wrestling your gear instead of wrestling the fish, hit that subscribe button for me. I drop content like this every single week on this channel because I am genuinely fed up watching solid anglers overpay for marketing and cosmetics. I read every single comment that comes through, so do me a favor and tell me what rod you are currently working with right now. I want to know what is in your hands. Cheap rod, expensive rod, mystery rod you found in your uncle's garage, whatever it is, tell me. Now let me get back to it because mod number 4 is going to frustrate you with how stupidly simple and cheap it actually is to do. This is the Reel Seat Shim, and it costs you roughly 2 cents worth of electrical tape to completely transform the feel of your hook set. Every budget rod I have ever picked up has microscopic play between the reel foot and the seat, a tiny wobble you would never notice casually. But that wobble creates a dead zone that eats hook set energy and muffles every single vibration trying to travel from the blank through the reel into your palm. Here is how I found this, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out for a guy who builds rods professionally for a living. I had already been doing the first 3 mods on client rods for years, and hook sets still felt slightly mushy on some of those budget sticks. Not terrible, just not that crisp instant snap I get from my custom builds where every component is seated with 0 tolerance and 0 movement. One night in my shop I grabbed a modded rod, mounted a reel, and happened to grip the reel foot while wiggling the rod tip side to side gently. I felt it, maybe 1/1000th of an inch of lateral movement between the reel foot and the seat housing, barely anything at all. I cut a thin strip of electrical tape, laid it inside the reel seat channel, remounted the reel, and tightened the locking rings down snug. The wobble was gone, dead solid, 0 play, completely locked in like a custom-fitted joint on a handmade rod from my bench. I set the hook on a practice cast across the yard, and the difference hit me immediately. That mushy dead feeling just vanished completely. You can do this in 30 seconds flat, and you probably have the materials sitting in a junk drawer right now in your kitchen. Cut a strip of electrical tape about 2 inches long and 1/4 inch wide, or use a small piece of aluminum foil folded over twice. Lay it inside the reel seat channel where the reel foot sits, then mount your reel and tighten the locking rings down like you normally would. Before you do that, though, try the wobble test first. Mount the reel without the shim and grip the reel body firmly in one hand. Now try to wiggle the rod side to side with your other hand and feel for any lateral play or movement between the reel and the blank. Add the shim, remount, do the same test. You will feel the difference immediately because there is no movement left at all now. The physics are simple. Any play between your reel and your blank absorbs energy that should travel straight from the hook point to your fingertips. A roll of electrical tape costs $1 at Dollar General, and you used about 2 inches of it, so this mod runs you roughly nothing. 4 mods finished, maybe 3 minutes of actual hands-on work, and you are holding a rod that has absolutely no business performing this well. But the 5th modification is my personal favorite, and it is the one that separates a rod that works from a rod that becomes a weapon in your hands. This is balance point tuning, making the rod feel like it disappears from your grip so all you feel is what is happening underwater. Every rod has a balance point, the exact spot where it sits level if you rest it across one finger like a seesaw with the reel mounted. On expensive custom builds, that point is carefully calibrated to sit just forward of the reel seat so the tip floats naturally and your wrist does 0 work. On budget rods, the balance point is almost always too far forward toward the tip because manufacturers do not invest in weight distribution at all. That means your wrist is fighting gravity all day long. Your hand muscles are tense and gripping instead of relaxed and feeling, and by hour 6, you are done. I figured out how much balance matters on a 12-hour guide day in the dead of July heat on a lake with 0 shade anywhere. By hour 10, my client was shaking out his casting hand every few minutes, cramping up, missing bites because his fingers were fatigued and numb. He was fishing a $350 rod that weighed almost nothing but was balanced like a hammer. All the weight was out front past the reel. I was throwing a modded budget rod I had balanced the night before in my shop with a couple of adhesive wheel weights tucked inside the butt cap. At hour 10, my wrist felt completely fresh. I was still detecting subtle bites, still making accurate casts, still fishing at full capacity without any fatigue at all. Grab a strip of adhesive wheel weights from AutoZone for about $3. That is enough to balance 10 rods if you are being careful. Start with a 1/4 ounce inside the butt cap or taped under the rear grip. Mount your reel, find the new balance point on your finger, and adjust. For jigging and finesse work, you want that balance point right at the reel seat. For cranking and reaction baits, slightly forward is perfectly fine. 5 modifications, 5 minutes of total work, and a handful of materials that cost less than a combo meal at the drive-thru window. You are now holding a rod that casts farther, feels more, hooks harder, balances better, and fishes longer than it has any right to. But here is where this whole thing takes a turn that I think is going to change the way you look at every rod rack you ever walk past again. I have personally stripped down and disassembled rods at every single price point from $20 to $500 on my workbench over 15 years. And what I found inside those expensive rods, underneath the pretty paint and the branded thread wraps and the fancy logos, made me genuinely angry the first time. A tournament angler brought me a $380 rod last year for a simple guide repair near the tip, cracked thread wrap, easy fix. When I stripped that rod down to the bare blank, I happened to have a $35 Walmart rod blank sitting right next to it on my bench from another project. I grabbed my calipers, measured the wall thickness on both blanks, checked the taper, examined the resin color and fiber layup pattern under magnification real close. Same mandrel shape, same wall thickness within 1/1000th of an inch, same resin system. I could tell by the amber color and the weave pattern of the graphite cloth underneath. Different paint job, different thread color on the wraps, different logos stamped on the butt section, and a $345 price difference between them sitting side by side. I put those 2 bare blanks next to each other on my workbench and took a photograph that I still have saved on my phone right now today. Every time someone tells me you need to spend $300 to get a rod that performs, I pull out that photo and watch their face change. You are not paying for performance when you buy an expensive rod. You are paying for a cosmetic finish and a brand licensing fee and a marketing budget. That should either make you angry enough to put the credit card away, or it should make you excited because now you understand the truth completely. The rod in your hand right now, with these 5 simple modifications done, is performing at a level most anglers are paying 10 times more to reach without even knowing it. And that truth is exactly what tackle shops are praying you never stumble across on your own. But here is the thing that keeps me up at night, and it is the reason I am not done talking to you yet about this. You can nail all 5 of these modifications perfectly: guide straight, grip tight, tip tuned, seat shimmed, balance point dialed in like a custom build. And if you make one extremely common mistake when you set up your line and your terminal tackle on this modded rod, you just wasted every single minute. Almost everybody makes this mistake because nobody talks about it. It is too simple to sell as a product and too small to build a marketing campaign around. It has to do with how you pair your line choice, your reel selection, and one tiny rigging detail that multiplies everything you just built or destroys it completely. I figured this out the hard way on a dead calm Clearwater day when nothing was working until I changed one thing that took about 10 seconds. So stay with me, because what I am about to show you next is the difference between a modded rod that works and a modded rod that genuinely terrifies fish. The mistake that kills everything is so obvious you will walk right past it without a second glance every single time. Your buddy, good angler, smart guy, watches every fishing video on the internet, did all 5 mods on a budget rod perfectly last spring. Guide straight, grip sealed, tip tuned, seat shimmed, balance point sitting right where I told him to put it on the blank. Then he grabbed a spool of 20-pound monofilament off his shelf because that is what he has always thrown on every rod he owns. Spooled it up, tied on a Texas rig, made his first cast into a brush pile on a Clearwater flat about 40 feet out from shore, looked at me and said the rod still felt dead, no bottom contact, no vibration, nothing coming through the blank at all whatsoever. I did not say a single word to him. I just reached into my bag and handed him a spool of 10-pound fluorocarbon line. He re-spooled right there on the bank, made one cast to the same brush pile, and his face changed before the bait hit bottom. He looked at me like I had swapped the rod out behind his back while he was not paying attention to what I was doing. But it was the same rod, same mods, same reel, same bait, same brush pile sitting in the same water on the same afternoon. The only thing that changed was the line, and that single change unlocked everything those 5 modifications had been trying to give him all along. Here is the physics in plain language that anybody can understand without an engineering degree from a fancy university somewhere. When you soften a tip and harden a grip, you tune the rod to pick up smaller, higher-frequency vibrations traveling up from your bait. Heavy monofilament is thick and stretchy. It absorbs those tiny vibrations like a sponge soaks up water on a countertop before breakfast. A modded rod with a softened moderate-action tip wants 8 to 10-pound fluorocarbon or a light-diameter braid in the 15 to 20-pound range with a fluorocarbon leader. A modded rod you kept in the fast-action range pairs beautifully with straight braid in 20 to 30-pound test for bottom contact techniques where maximum sensitivity matters most. You can grab a spool of decent fluorocarbon at Walmart for about $8 any day of the week right now. Braid costs a little more, but a 150-yard spool will last you months if you are not backlashing it into a bird nest every other cast. The rule I give every client who walks out of my shop with a modded rod is dead simple and easy to remember forever. Lighter, thinner, more supple line amplifies what you built. Heavier, stiffer line fights it and chokes the sensitivity right out of the blank. 17-pound plus monofilament on a modded finesse rod kills every single modification you just spent 5 minutes installing on that stick. All of them gone. Match the line to what the rod has become, not to what you have always used out of habit or comfort or whatever is already on the spool. Get that pairing right, and you will feel things through that blank you have never felt before. Weed ticks, sand to gravel transitions, the difference between a rock and a crawdad sitting next to it. But there is one more pairing most people completely overlook, and it has absolutely nothing to do with what is on the spool. Your reel choice either turns this whole system up to 11, or it quietly sabotages everything you just built without you ever knowing. I had a guide trip last October, Carolina Rig Day, sandy flats, water about 12 feet deep with scattered shell beds running through the middle. I paired a modded budget rod with a smooth low gear ratio reel, 5.4 to 1, and handed it to my client with zero explanation about why. He dragged that rig across the bottom all morning and outfished every other boat on the lake 7 fish to their 2 or 3 at best. The slow retrieve matched the rod's new sensitivity profile perfectly. He could feel every grain of sand shifting under the sinker weight. He told me he felt a shell bed transition from 40 feet away, which sounds insane until you understand what a matched system actually does. The guys in the other boats had nicer gear across the board, better reels, more expensive rods, fancier electronics on the bow. They just could not feel what he was feeling because their systems were fighting themselves instead of working together as one unit. Here is the diagnostic. A high-speed reel at 7.1 to 1 or higher on a modded moderate action rod creates a mismatch immediately. The fast retrieve pulls your bait faster than the softened tip can track, and you lose feel because the rod cannot keep up with the reel. A moderate speed reel in the 6.3 to 6.8 range, or a slower reel around 5.4, lets you stay inside the rod's sensitivity window. Now flip it. A modded fast-action rod for reaction baits pairs perfectly with a high-speed reel because you need that quick line pickup on hook sets. The other factor is weight, and this connects directly back to mod number 5 that you just finished doing 10 minutes ago on your balance point. If you mount a reel that is too heavy on a light modded rod, it pulls the balance point forward past where you calibrated it with those wheel weights. Simple test that takes 10 seconds. Mount the reel, close your eyes, make 5 fan casts across the yard, and pay attention to what feels off. If the rod feels nose-heavy, tip-diving, or wrist-straining on the cast, the real weight is wrong for the balance setup you just dialed in. You do not need a $200 reel to make this work. A $50 reel from Walmart or Amazon with the right gear ratio and the right weight will outperform a premium reel that is mismatched to your rod every single day of the week and twice on Sundays. Now your rod and reel are speaking the same language, the line is carrying the signal clean, and the whole system is dialed in like a tuned engine. But here is where I need you to lean in close, because what I am about to tell you absolutely blew my mind when I stumbled into it by accident. I have never heard anyone else talk about this. Not on YouTube, not in tackle shops, not at trade shows, not in any rod building forum I have ever visited online. It is too simple to sell as a product and too small to build a marketing campaign around, so it just sits there in plain sight, invisible. It has to do with the knot at the end of your line, the last connection point between you and the fish sitting down there on the bottom. And I promise you, when I explain why it matters this much on a modded budget rod, you are going to retie every rod in your truck tonight. I found this on a dead calm, clear water day when the fish were being absolutely impossible, and I had already tried everything in my tackle bag twice. I was fishing a modded rod with a Texas-rigged worm, getting decent sensitivity, feeling the bottom fine, but wanting just a little bit more detail. On a whim, no science, no theory, just boredom and frustration, I cut my standard Palomar knot off and retied with a San Diego jam knot instead. The Palomar is a great knot, strong and reliable, but it has that doubled-over loop that creates a small bulge of line mass right at the hook-eye connection. The San Diego jam cinches down into a tight, low-profile wrap that sits flush against the eye with almost no extra material hanging off the connection point. I made my first cast after retying and dragged that worm across a gravel bar about 30 feet from the boat on a slow retrieve. I felt individual pebbles, not just rocky bottom, not just a general rough texture, but distinct individual pebbles rolling under my sinker one at a time. I stopped casting and stared at the rod in my hand like it had just spoken a full sentence to me in plain English. Same line, same bait, same rod, same reel, same gravel bar I had just fished 30 seconds earlier with the other knot tied on. The only variable was the knot, a smaller, tighter connection point that let more vibration pass through without getting dampened by excess material mass. I tested this systematically over the next month because I needed to know if I was losing my mind or actually onto something real. Same rod, same setup, alternating knots every 10 casts, paying attention to what I could and could not feel through the blank each time. The difference was consistent and repeatable. The low-profile knot transmitted more information every single time without exception across 30 days of testing. On a $300 rod with premium components, this difference is subtle enough that most people would never notice it at all, honestly. But on a modded budget rod, where you have already optimized every other link in the sensitivity chain from butt cap to guide tip, the knot becomes the last remaining bottleneck choking the signal before it reaches your hand. One knot change, 15 seconds of work, and suddenly a $30 rod was telling me things a $300 rod sitting in my boat never did. Have any of you tried something like this? Even just one of these mods or one of these pairing changes on a rod you already own? I genuinely want to hear what happened, so drop it in the comments and tell me what rod you modded and what you felt different afterward. Because here is my track record, and I am giving you the real numbers with nothing inflated or exaggerated for the camera right now. I have modded over 300 rods in the last 5 years for guide clients, tournament anglers, weekend bank fishermen, and kids who just wanted a better stick. Exactly 2 people out of those 300 came back and told me they could not feel a meaningful difference after the modifications. 2 out of $300, and I am fairly certain both of them skipped the grip mod because the rod still had that spongy factory feel when I checked them later. A regular guide client of mine, experienced angler, fished premium gear his entire adult life, literally laughed out loud when I handed him a modded Walmart rod at the start of a trip last summer. 20 minutes in, he hooked a 6-pound largemouth on a jig, fought it for 2 solid minutes, lipped it at the boat, and went completely silent, staring at the rod in his hand. He held that fish, looked at the rod, looked at me, and said he felt every single head shake through the blank. Everyone, from hookset to boat. He did not ask for a different rod the rest of that day, and he called me that night asking me to mod 3 more budget rods for him before his next trip. Now, I would be lying to you if I told you nothing can go wrong with these modifications, because things absolutely can go wrong if you rush. The tip sanding is where most people get into trouble. If you remove too much material, the blank wall gets thin enough that it flexes beautifully in your hand, but snaps clean off on a hard hookset under load. 3 to 4 light passes with fine grit. Test the flex, then do more only if you need to. That is the rule that keeps rods intact and fish connected. Too much superglue under the grip wrap creates a brittle shell that can crack on a deep flex and create a pressure point that eventually breaks the blank underneath. Over-shimming the reel seat with too many layers of tape puts outward pressure on the housing, and on cheap graphite composite seats that pressure can crack the whole thing open. I learned the sanding lesson the expensive way, rushed a rod, did 8 passes without testing, took it on a guide trip the next morning feeling confident about my work. Hooked a solid fish, set the hook hard, and the tip section snapped clean off right at the sanding point like a dry twig in January. Lost the fish, lost the rod, and had to explain to my client why the guide's own equipment just exploded in the middle of a fight like a cheap firework. Nothing teaches you patience quite like watching a 4-pound bass swim away with your rod tip hanging from its mouth, trailing 6 feet of fluorocarbon line behind it. Go slow, test after every single step, and remember the golden rule. You can always remove more material, but you can never add it back once it is gone. Now let me put some real numbers on this whole thing, because when you see the actual cost breakdown side by side, the math becomes almost offensive to look at. Fine grit sandpaper in 400 and 600 grit costs about $1.50 at any hardware store in the country right now today. Electrical tape or aluminum foil for the reel seat shim, maybe $1, and you will use a tiny fraction of the roll on any single rod you modify. Cork sealant or tennis overgrip tape runs $2 to $3, super glue is $1, and adhesive wheel weights from AutoZone cost about $3 for a strip. That strip of wheel weights is enough to balance 8 to 10 rods if you are being careful about how much you use per stick. Total cost per rod for all 5 modifications. Roughly $4 to $6 depending on what you already have lying around your garage or kitchen. Compare that to buying a rod that performs at this level off the shelf at a tackle shop. You are looking at $200 to $400 minimum for a comparable feel. Here is where the math gets genuinely ridiculous and starts to feel like you are cheating the system somehow without breaking any rules. For the price of one mid-range rod at $250, you could buy 8 budget rods at $30 each for $240 total. Mod all 8 of them at $6 each for another $48. Gauier, that is $288 total out the door for everything. 8 technique-specific rods. 1 for jigs, 1 for cranks, 1 for finesse, 1 for topwater, 1 for Carolina rigs, 1 for drop shot, 1 for spinnerbaits, 1 for frogs. In my tackle lab right now, I have 11 modded budget rods on the wall, each set up for a specific technique with matched line and reel perfectly paired. Total investment in all 11 rods plus every mod material I used, less than $400 sitting right there on my wall ready to fish tomorrow morning. A buddy of mine owns 3 rods that cost more than my entire 11-rod arsenal combined, and I outfish him regularly and consistently. He knows it. It drives him absolutely crazy. And that is honestly the thing that gets me fired up about sharing this with you today. This is not about being cheap. I will spend money on gear when spending money actually buys me something real and measurable in performance. This is about being smart enough to understand what actually makes a rod perform versus what is just marketing noise designed to separate you from your wallet. And honestly, it is about respecting the craft enough to look under the hood instead of just trusting the paint job on the outside of the car. But here is what I did not expect when I started doing this 15 years ago, and it goes deeper than saving money or catching more fish on a Tuesday. Something changes inside you when you build your own gear with your own hands at your own workbench. There is a reason guys who rebuild their own truck engines, tie their own flies, pour their own rifle cartridges, they all say the exact same thing about it. When you make it yourself, you use it differently because you understand it at a level that buying something off a shelf can never give you. You trust a rod you modified because you know exactly what it can handle and exactly where its limits sit on the stress curve. That trust changes how you fish. You are more patient because you know the rod will tell you when a fish breathes on your bait. You are more focused because you are not second-guessing your equipment every time you miss a bite or lose a fish on a hook set. You are more connected to the water because the rod is an extension of your hand, not a product with a barcode and a receipt. Some of my best days on the water, days I will carry with me until they put me in the ground, were with rods that cost less than a gas station lunch. A $9 rod I pulled from a clearance bin and modded on my tailgate in a parking lot before launching. A rod my daughter picked out for me at a flea market because she liked the purple color on the blank and wanted her dad to have it. I have caught fish on those rods that guys with $1,000 setups dream about catching their entire lives on the water, not because the rods were magic or special or blessed by some fishing saint, because I knew exactly what those rods could do since I made them do it. When you know your gear that well, you fish differently, you fish more deliberately, and honestly, you just plain fish better than you did before. And that brings me to the one thing I want you to carry out of this video today above everything else I showed you. The best rod you will ever own is not the one with the highest price tag hanging from the guide or the fanciest logo printed on the blank. It is the one you understand completely, the one you tuned with your own hands and tested with your own casts and trusted with your own fish. You do not need permission from a brand name to catch fish, and you do not need a pro staff sponsorship to hold pro-level gear. You do not need to finance a rod on a credit card to feel confident standing on the front deck of any boat on any lake. You just need 5 minutes, a few dollars worth of materials from your junk drawer, and the willingness to get your hands a little dirty. Every one of these modded rods hanging on my shop wall behind me right now has a small tag hanging from the reel seat with writing on it. Each tag has the biggest fish that rod has caught, species and weight written in permanent marker, so I never forget what it did. 5-pound 8 largemouth on a $32 Walmart rod, 7-pound channel cat on a $28 clearance rod from a going-out-of-business sale, a 4-pound smallmouth on a rod my buddy was literally about to throw in the trash can behind his garage before I grabbed it from him. None of those stories start with "I spent $300. Every single one of them starts with "I spent 5 minutes. Next time you walk past that rod rack at Walmart or any clearance bin at any store anywhere in this country, I want you to stop. Look at those budget rods differently than you ever have before, because now you know what they actually are sitting there in that rack. They are not cheap rods. They are raw material waiting for someone who knows what to do with them and has 5 minutes to spare. And you are the craftsman now. You have the knowledge, you have the skills, and you have no more excuses left to hide behind anymore. Next week, I'm going to show you how to take a $2 crankbait and repaint it into something that triggers strikes from fish that ignore everything else in your tackle box completely. Same philosophy, small investment, big results, your own 2 hands, and the satisfaction of knowing you built something that actually works on the water. If this video opened your eyes even a little bit today, or if you are going to try even one of these mods tonight, hit that like button and subscribe. I will see you on the water.